Please be seated. The court is now back in session. The floor is now given to Nuon Chia's defense to put questions to this civil party. You may proceed. Senator, good afternoon, Mr. President, Jonas. Good afternoon, Madam Sripal. I am a lawyer for Mr. Nuon Chia. I have some questions for you, only a few. In your interview with the co-investigating judges, you stated that you know how to read and to write. What is your level of education? Respond. Thank you, counsel. I completed my grade 1, that is, I finished my baccalaureate in 1974. Thank you. Question. In your response to the lead co-lawyers, you said that your father was a spy for Tribunal regime or a CIA agent. Can you clarify it a little bit more? Was he a spy or a CIA agent? Response. My father was a spy in the Tribunal regime. He was not a CIA agent. He had a minor role in the spy department. Question. In early 1975, did you know back then that the people who fled into the city, do you know the number of those people? Response. In 1975, before the liberation of the city by the Khmer Rouge soldiers, I noticed the increase of the city dwellers, but I cannot tell you the exact figures of the number of people living in Phnom Penh at the time. Question. Can you say whether the number doubled before that year or whether it's 1.5? Response. Since I am not sure, I decline to respond to this question. Question. Your father was a Tribunal spy. And this morning you stated before this chamber that you received a lot of information from your father. Did you ever hear your father talking about the civilians and the soldiers, that is the Tribunal soldiers and the Khmer Rouge soldiers? Did he tell you the number of casualties, both civilians and soldiers on both sides? Response: I could not grasp the number of the casualties, and my father did not tell me that information. Question: did you read the newspapers or magazine where the number of casualties were printed? Response: the living condition in my family was rather low at the time. We could not afford buying a newspaper, and usually if I could lay my hand on a newspaper, I would usually read a novel, not anything related to the situation in the country. Question: in your document D296/10, in your question answer number 4, you stated that on the day that the Khmer Rouge soldiers evacuated people from the city in 1975, and after they shot into the air, and if the people refused to leave Phnom Penh, then the Khmer Rouge would beat them with a gun butt. You also state that you witnessed this event personally near Klang Rumsel market. Did you witness that particular event at that location only, or you also witnessed it elsewhere? Response: the Khmer Rouge soldiers beat the people who refused to leave Phnom Penh. I witnessed only one family who was my neighbor. And while en route, when those people who were trying to return to Phnom Penh to collect their belongings or other things, they were stopped by the Khmer Rouge. And also en route, when a family member was sick and they wanted to accompany them, they were forced, threatened by the Khmer Rouge soldiers, and they also fired into the air to threaten them to leave. And the sin of beating the people with a gun butt, I witnessed that near Klang Rumsel market. Question: my question to you is that whether you only witnessed this kind of event once, or did you see it repeat elsewhere? Response: I witnessed it myself only at that one location. And while en route, as I stated, the scene was different, but there were beating and threatening. Because while en route, I saw guns being fired into the air, and people were whipped, but an exact scene of a beating with a gun butt I only saw once. Questioned in the same document, in question answer 22, you responded in the last sentence. That there was another story that I heard from my elder sister named Pich Pan, who lived there, that every night they transported people in ox carts from the village to be executed, and she also saw the execution site. That is your statement before the co-investigating judges. Did your elder sister witness it, or did you personally witness it? Response. It was my elder sister who witnessed it, and she told me. Thank you. Question in the same document, and in question answer 23, you stated that in 1978 there was a woman by the name of Ni. She was a 17-April person, and some committed a moral offense. I did not know how they committed the moral offense, but one day Bong Chen had me pick Tnang leaves behind Tul Thmai Hospital, and I saw some was tied at the back, and they said that you committed a moral offense. Then they cut his stomach open to remove his gallbladder. When he was still alive, they tied his arms at his back to a pole. As for female comrade Ni, they had her take off her clothes and tied her up. Then a militiaman lightly pressed a tobacco cutting knife on her neck, and the female shouted "ouch" in pain, and the militiaman asked her that, "Do you feel good?" That militiaman kept doing so until she died. I did not know if that militiaman raped her or not. My question is the following. Did you witness that event personally, or were you told of what happened? Response. I personally witnessed the event. However, as I stated in that document, I did not know whether the woman had been raped before she was tied to the pole by the militiaman. What I witnessed was when Comrade Som's stomach was cut open and the tobacco cutting knife was pressed against Comrade Ni's neck. I witnessed it by myself. Nobody told me of what happened. Question: Did you witness it during the day or night time? Response: It happened in the afternoon, not during the day or at night. It was after our lunch break, and actually I was asked to go and pick the thnang leaves behind the tool Thmai. So while I was walking to pick that thnang leaves, I did not notice anything. At that time, I heard the shouting, so I quietly tried to pick at the source of the scream. I actually was scared, and I tried. I wanted to go back, but I couldn't move my feet. I was kind of stuck in that situation. And after that woman died, and after I heard the laughing, I kind of gained consciousness, and I remained in that position until all the militiamen had left. Then I could move myself back to the kitchen without having any leaves. Question: When you witnessed the rape or the killing, personally, were you scared? Response: I was terrified. I have all the questions for you. Thank you, Madam Sivapati. Thank you, Mr. President. President, the floor is now given to Ieng Sari's defense to put questions to this civil party. You may proceed. And Madam, thank you, Mr. President. Once again, good afternoon, Mr. President, Johners, and everyone. Good afternoon, Madam Pachsray Paul. My name is Ang Wadom, and to my right is Mr. Michael Canavas. We are co-defense counsel for Mr. Ieng Sari. I only have one question for you. In your response to the questions put to you by the lead co-lawyers, that the evacuees on the train and that if a person in any of the wagon relieved himself or herself without informing the militiamen first, that person would be shot dead or killed. That is, those militiamen or Khmer soldiers in the wagon. You stated that if is it your personal assumption? Response: What I stated in my response to the lead co-lawyers, I stated that if anyone relieved himself or herself in the wagon, that person will be shot dead by the militiamen. In fact, it happened. Because in some cases it happened and or not happened, but indeed it happened in a wagon and a soldier shot that person dead. And if later on someone wanted to relieve himself, that person needed to seek permission from the Khmer Rouge soldiers first. Thank you, says the council. My next question is the following. Did you witness that event by yourself? Response. That crime took place in the wagon where I was in. I could not tell you what happened in other wagons. Question. How many people were shot dead in that wagon? Response. There was only one person, because after that nobody dared to relieve himself or herself. Thank you, Madam Paul. I have no further question for you, and on behalf of Mr. Evidentiary, we thank you very much for your testimony before this chamber to ascertain the truth, and we wish you all the best and have a safe trip back home. Thank you, Mr. President. President, thank you. The floor is now given to Keo Sampon's defense to put questions to this civil party. Kung Samon, thank you, Mr. President. Good afternoon, everyone. And good afternoon, Madam Paul. On behalf of my client, Keo Sampon, we do not have any question for you. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Madam Paul. As indicated at the commencement of your testimony, the Chamber will give you an opportunity at the conclusion to make a statement of suffering and harms you suffered during the Democratic Cambodia regime, if you wish to do so. Civil Party. Mr. President, Your Honors, good afternoon everyone in and around the courtroom. I would like to take this opportunity to express my suffering that I suffered during the 3 years, 8 months, 20 days period. I am privileged to make such a suffering before this chamber today. During the regime, the 3 years, 8 months regime, I lost everything. And instead, I was terrified emotionally and physically, and it still remains with me today. The crimes that devastated myself and my family and my entire nation and people. During the regime, my younger brother, who was 14 years old, and out of hunger, he stole a pumpkin and he was smashed. That was an agony that I had to live with. My father, my younger siblings, although they were not killed, not executed, they died as a result of hard work and lack of medicine. And what I cannot forget is that the female Jews who live at Prohokbal Cooperative, the 19 of them, they were raped each night. Those women were in a special unit. 19 of them were raped each night, and on the 20th night, which was the turn of my best friend, she told me of what happened. And as a woman who was raped by the chief of the cooperative or chief of the sector, That was a real agony. And in this regime, that person would be prosecuted and convicted. Your Honors, the suffering, the agony could not go away. It remained with me. However, I urge the ECCC to give the collective reparation. Of course, we want a collective reparation as we are the civil parties. However, we want it to be realized. There could be a stupa, or there could be a medical center to support the victims, to support the civil parties, and the stupa where we could celebrate the religious ceremony during the water festival or during the New Year, so that we could find peace within ourselves. Another important point is that who commit a crime shall be punished. For that reason, I urge Mr. President to find justice, and not just for myself, but for all the victims, because I'm also one of the victims. And please, try to find and to force those senior leaders and those most responsible to acknowledge the crimes that they committed during the period of 3 years and 8 months, and that they acknowledge their plans to devastate the country, to engage in the mass killing of the people. And I urge Your Honor to punish them severely, so that it can be used as an example for the younger generation, that no one will be spared when they commit a crime. President. Thank you, Madam Paul. The hearing of your testimony has now come to a conclusion, and you are excused. Your testimony can contribute to ascertaining the truth. You may now return to your residence or wherever you wish, and we wish you all the best and have a safe trip. Court officer, in coordination with Visu, please try to make the necessary arrangement for the civil party to return to her residence. Madam Paul, you may now leave the courtroom.
The President, next we would like to hand over to counsels and parties to the proceeding to make some observation with regard to the statement of suffering made by Madam Civil Party a moment ago, if you would wish to do so. The President, it appears to the Chamber that there is no such observation, and the Chamber wishes to also inform the parties that we have received a response by the legal lawyers for the Civil Party concerning the Civil Party TCCPW 213 that the civil parties would not wish the party to be heard, rather the civil party to be heard. And the counsels for the civil parties responded to the question made by Judge Lavergne yesterday. And that in the statement TCCP 2 1/3 testimony is not relevant, and for that reason the chamber is not going to hear this civil party's testimony. Next, the chamber would like to hear the testimony of TCCP 59. Court officer is now instructed to call in the civil party to the courtroom, please. Good afternoon, Mr. Civil Party. What is your name, please? Response: I am Kum Van Di. Question: Mr. Kum Van Di, when was you born? Response: I was born on the 6th of June, 1962. Question: Where were you born? Response: I was born in Angkor Chai village, Angkor Chai commune, Angkor Chai district of Kampot province. Question: Where do you live? Response: I live in village 4, Trang Trojung commune, Phnom Sruit district, Kampong Speu province. Question: What do you do for a living? Response: I am a laborer. Question: What is your father's name? Response: He is Kam L. Question: What is your mother's name? She is Om Yun. She is Om Yun. Question: How many brothers and sisters do you have? Response: I have 5 brothers and sisters. Question: Are you married? If so, what is your wife's name? Response: Yes, I am. She is Chun Srai Mom. Question: How many children do you have? Response: I have 6 children. The President: Mr. Kum Van Di, as a civil party during these proceedings, you have the right to express your statement of suffering and the injuries or the harms that you have suffered resulted from the crimes. You will be given this opportunity to make such statement at the end of your testimony session. Indeed, the injuries that you have suffered during the time of the democratic Cambodia. Before concluding your testimony, you will indeed be offered such opportunity to express your statement of suffering. The Chamber also wishes to inform the legal lawyers for the civil parties, according to Internal Rules 91 bis, legal lawyers will be offered the opportunity to put questions to the civil party before the other parties to the proceeding. You may now proceed. Counsel Big Ong. Good afternoon, Mr. President and Your Honors. Counsel Tisrina will be the one who is putting questions to the civil party. Thank you very much, Mr. President and Your Honors. The President, Counsel Tisrina, you may now proceed. Counsel Tisrina. Good afternoon, Mr. President and Your Honors. Good morning to you, Mr. Kumwandi. First, I have a few questions concerning your residence during the colonial regime. Where did your family and you live during the colonial regime? Response. During that regime, I lived in Troi Chongwa. I don't remember the name of the commune, but it was there at Troi Chongwa. Perhaps it was in Mokkampul district, Kandal province. Question. How many people were there in your family altogether at that time? Response. I don't remember how many people were there in the entire family because two of my brothers disappeared, and I lived with my parents and a cousin and sisters, Sri Don and Sri Sukunthir. Both of them are my sisters. Question. What did your parents do for a living during that period? Response. During colonial time, my mother was a housewife when my father was in the Navy. Question. What did you do then? Response. I was still at school as a student. Question. Do you still recollect what happened prior to the time when the Khmer Rouge captured Phnom Penh? What happened in your neighborhood? Response. I don't remember this exactly, but I saw colonial soldiers were engaged in the fighting with the Khmer Rouge soldiers. There were some helicopters and automatic guns were also seen firing some rounds from the helicopters, and the fighting was both during the day and night. And the Khmer Rouge soldiers were based at Vihir Sur, and near my home, Lono soldiers would be there. That's what I can recollect. Question. During the fighting between both soldiers, the Khmer Rouge and the Lono soldiers, did you see whether any of your family members or villagers in your area get injured or wounded? Response. None of my family member was injured, but members of the families who lives next door got injured, although I did not really go out to see what happened for sure, because we had to take refuge in the bunker or trenches to be safe. Question. Was your area controlled by the Khmer liberated group or by the Lono? Response. At that time, the Khmer Rouge did not take control of the area. The vicinity was under the occupation of the Lono soldiers. Question. You said that you lived in the Choroi Changwa region. When this happened, did you change your location? Response. Yes, we did. We had to relocate. We had to move to my uncle. Indeed, my uncle told my mother that we would not be safe to stay at the current location. We had to find a better place, in particular moving to his house, because he said that at his house bombs would not be dropped there. So after some consultation with the family members, we finally decided to relocate to my uncle's house. Question. Where is his house? Response. It was at San Thomok location. Question. During the time when you stayed at your uncle's house, and do you remember how long had you been there before Phnom Penh was captured by the Khmer Rouge? Response. So far as I remember, I had been living at my uncle's house on several occasions before Phnom Penh was captured. Question. Could you please state that again for clarity? You said you had stayed at your uncle's house on 2 or 3 or several occasions. What does that mean? Response. First, because of the fighting, we were terrified, so we moved from our home to my uncle's house. After the fighting was quiet, or there was no longer any fighting, then we would return to our home. And then there was another fighting, then we would move there again, back and forth. Question. Do you remember when exactly the final time you stayed at your um, uncle's house, and how soon was that before Phnom Penh was captured? Response: I don't remember how long I stayed at the house before Phnom Penh was captured, but I remember that during the last day of the fighting, uh, after there was no more bombs at midnight, we traveled to our uncle's house. Question: I'm afraid I have to repeat this question. You said that you had to move to your uncle's house when there was no more bombs or fire, and at night. How long had you stayed at your uncle's house before Phnom Penh was captured by the Khmer Rouge? Do you understand my question? If not, please let me know. Response: I only spent overnight at my uncle's house. Early in the morning of the next day, at about 6 a.m., I woke up to see a lot of Khmer Rouge soldiers already entering Phnom Penh. And I saw my uncle driving a jeep by the American soldiers, and he parked in front of our house when the Khmer Rouge soldiers were still marching on the road, and he was shot by one of the Khmer Rouge soldiers, and he collapsed. And the soldier went back into the group of other soldiers and continued their journey. Question: can you describe to the chamber why your uncle was shot? Did he engage in any verbal arguments or conversation with the soldier who shot him before he died? Response: I remember briefly because I was in the house when the door was closed. I heard that the jeep was coming and stopped, and indeed my uncle who was driving it. I didn't pay attention to the conversation between him and the soldier, but I heard the gunshot, and I opened the door slightly to see that my uncle already fell down on the ground in blood, but he was wearing military uniform with some of his ranks still hanging on his shoulder. Question: what was your uncle doing at that time? What was his rank? Response: I don't remember what rank he was in at that time, but I remember that my father said that my uncle was a colonel. Question: did you witness the moment when your uncle was shot to death? Response: I did not see when he was shot, but I heard the gunshot, And upon hearing this gunshot, I opened the door to see that he was already falling onto the ground in blood. Question: do you remember who actually shot him? Response: I knew that the guy was a Khmer Rouge soldier, although I don't know his name. Question: how can you presume that it was the Khmer Rouge soldier who shot your uncle to death? Response: at that time, I saw a Khmer Rouge soldier, that Khmer Rouge soldier who left the group, and they were... He was there saying that that's what happened to a traitor, so all traitors had to be smashed. That's what I heard from him. And then I left to the side, to the backyard of my house, escaping. Question: did your uncle's wife come out to see what happened to her husband? Do you still remember this? Response: I do remember the event, although not in detail. I still recollect that at that moment, first, we heard the cries of people, and then everyone had to get out of their home, and my uncle's wife cried sadly because she had to cry on the dead body of her husband because she missed her husband. She felt very bad that her husband died. He was a very gentle person. Question: after your uncle was killed, did you know that at that moment people had to be evacuated? Or, in other words, how soon after the death of your uncle that the population of Phnom Penh was announced to be evacuated and to leave the city? Response: at that time I did not hear anything. We believed that our family had to invite some Buddhist monks to chant some Dharma or celebrate, to conduct some kind of traditional ritual ceremony, but we couldn't find any Buddhist monks, so we decided to go without such ceremony. And at about 9 a.m. of the same day, we heard people were shouting on motorbikes on National Road, on road Cambodia Crown Boulevard. Indeed, we heard that people in the city had to leave the capital city because the Americans would drop bomb on us very soon. That's what we heard.
Question: can you recall back then when the announcement was made, what was the particular of the person who made the announcement? What kind of uniform he was wearing, for example? Was he a soldier, a loyal soldier, or a soldier from another group. Response. The soldier was dressed in a black uniform, having a scarf around the neck with a beret on the cap, and he was actually accompanied by another person riding an SL motorbike, and another person who made an announcement. He was holding a mobile loudspeaker. The announcement was for the city dwellers to leave the city immediately for 3 days only. And that was to avoid the aerial bombardment by the Americans. And the situation back then was rather confusing. There were shootings and people died. So we rushed to pack our little belonging to leave our house in the hopes that we would return in 3 days. Question: did your family leave as announced, or were you all forced to leave? Response: at that time we hesitated to leave. We were waiting for other people whether they would leave or not. Then there was another group of soldiers. They also shouted that why we were still waiting, why we did not go. They asked us to go in order to avoid the area bombardment. So upon hearing such an appeal, we rushed ourselves to leave with our little belonging. That's how I can recall. Question: after being threatened, was any armed used to force people to leave their home? Response: at the location where I live, I did not see any threatening with arms. But a bit further, about 10 to 20 meters away from where I was, there were a group of people who was gathering, and then there were shots fired into the air to disperse them, and they were urged to move. I heard that faint shouting from a distance. It could be about 10 meters from where I was. That's what I can recall. Question: did you and your family leave Phnom Penh city immediately? And which direction did you head to? Response: my family and my uncle's family, that is the wife of my uncle, we left separately. I was heading toward Chrui Chongwa Bridge toward National Road number 6. But I cannot recall the details as which road we took, because I was not familiar with all the roads in Phnom Penh back then. Question: you said you took National Road number 6, and when you left your uncle's house in Santomok, And while you were in the vicinity of Tribunal Bridge, did you experience any particular events during this period of time? Response. While I was traveling on National Road number 6, the road was congested with people. It was difficult to move. And I saw wounded people, and I could not say for sure whether they were civilians or they were soldiers. I saw people with bandage. I saw people with IV injection. But I did not pay much attention to them as I was worried that I would be separated from my family. And we tried to rush along with other people. Question. Between your uncle's house in Santomok and Tribunal Bridge, during this stretch of road, did you observe any soldiers patrolling the road? And what was the general situation back then, if you can recall? Response. While we left our uncle's house, I noticed signs being displayed. I saw the Khmer soldiers in a black uniform and a scarf around the neck and a beret. They carried AK-47 rifles or M16. They were along the road. They were about 10 meters. The distance between each soldier was about 10 meters. However, they carried their gun pointing to the ground. That's how I observed. Question. You stated that some people you saw had a bandage on their arm. Did you see those people who were patrolling the road? That's when you said they were standing on the road about 10 meters each. Did they pay attention to those wounded people? Response. I did not see that those soldiers took care of the wounded. They were standing still on the road, and where it was congested, they would shout to the people to move quicker so that the one from behind could follow. But as I observed, they did not pay attention to the sick. Question. Did you observe that amongst the crowd of people, was the crowd heading in one direction out of the city, or there was another group heading back in? Response. The majority of the people were heading outside of the city, and only a small number was heading back in. Maybe they were lost, or maybe they were trying to find their relatives, or trying to find their properties, or try to return to their homes to get money. Of course, that's how I observed, but I did not ask them, so I did not know the actual reason for them returning back into the city. Question. When you were traveling out of the city toward Tribunal Bridge, did you see that people refused to leave because they did not want to abandon their house or their property? And if so, what happened to them? Response. I did not seem to see people refuse to leave because they were afraid of losing their property. But I heard people talking while we were en route that they did not bring much of their property as they were rushed to go out for a short period of time. That's how I can recall. Question. At that point in time, were there any shootings where people were shot dead, or were there any beating? Response. I saw one man, but I did not know him or his name. He was walking in an opposite direction and he was shouting that he lost his children. And when he approached the Khmer Rouge soldier who was standing, he asked for the permission to return to find his children. But the Khmer Rouge soldier shouted back at him to move ahead, otherwise he would be dead. And they used that word, dead, and by that time I was not sure what he meant. And then that man was on his knees begging the Khmer Rouge soldier. And the Khmer Rouge soldiers hit his back with his rifle. Then the man fell on his face on the ground. And later on, that man walked away in a state of disappointment. And at that time, my hand was held by my other family members, and we walked past, and I turned back to see what happened. Actually, we were walking quite slowly, and my father urged me not to look back and just to rush to go along. So then I turned back and I just rushed along with my family. President, thank you. The time is appropriate for a short break. We will take a 20-minute break and return at 3 p.m. Court officer, could you assist the civil party during the break and have him returned at 3 p.m.